Hey everyone, welcome to the Center for Creative Leadership webinar, No Office, No Problem, How Financial Services Firms Can Stay Connected and Thrive with Better Conversations. My name is Michelle Bryan. I will be your webinar moderator for today's session. At the Center for Creative Leadership, also known as CCL, our sole focus is leadership development, education, and research. We bring leadership development experience to financial services firms around the world. So whether your organization is active in banking, investments, insurance, or payments, we have research-based methodology and expertise to support you with individual, team, and organizational leadership development. So today's webinar, we will share how a strong, connected culture is more critical for this industry than ever before. You will learn how Better Conversations can address disruptions, build a strong organizational culture, and drive performance for financial services firms. So thank you so much for taking time being with us today. I will go ahead and turn it over to Shelly Tompkins.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So I too would like to thank you all for joining. I'm sure like me, your days are probably pretty busy. They all seem to blend together for me right now. So you taking an hour out to join us is very much appreciated. And we hope that at the end of our time together that you'll be able to walk away with a nugget or two that you can apply in real time. So to start the session off, I actually want to share a personal story. So a few years ago, I used to work for a financial services organization, and I was allowed to work remotely, largely because my territory was so expansive. It was definitely pre-COVID-19. And over a period of time, a peer of mine was promoted to manager. Well, one day while I was at a dentist's office, it was actually 7 a.m. in the morning. I had a 7:30 a.m. appointment, trying to get things out of the way before I start my day. I decided while I was waiting, I was going to send some emails. And so it happens that several of the emails ended up going to my manager. Shortly thereafter, while I'm still waiting, I receive a text from the manager asking me, "Are you out of town?" I thought that was kind of odd. I replied back, "No, I'm actually waiting to get my teeth cleaned. Is there something you need?" And the reply was, "No, your instant messaging light was out." Well, I thought, okay, what does that mean? So I didn't really get it at first, but I decided to try a little experiment. So the very next day, I usually had my instant messaging light or my IM light set to start when I started my Outlook. And I decided I was going to not make it automatic, and I just turned it on when I needed it. Well, needless to say, several days after that initial question about where I was, I began getting similar text messages. Well, I'm sure you can imagine about this time and after these series of events, my relationship with my manager began to deteriorate because clearly there was no trust, and I would say on either end. We needed to have a heart-to-heart conversation where there was going to be a lot of listening, a lot of asking questions, and a lot of getting understanding, because the reality of the matter was that we were missing a solid relationship and trust. So what we know is that building better conversations every day builds relationships and trust. And the reverse of that is true as well. Relations and trust make for better conversations. And when we have stronger relationships at work, we're more productive. So I'm going to use this story kind of throughout as I share different principles with you. But for now, I'd like to turn this over to my colleague, Adam, who's going to walk you through the session agenda and introduce the team. Adam?
Great. Thank you, Shelly. So this is Adam Nyberg, and I want to thank you for attending the CCL webinar, No Office, No Problem, How Financial Firms Can Stay Connected and Thrive with Better Conversation. I am the Program Manager at Finance for Financial Services at CCL. I'm joined on my call by my colleagues, Shelly Tompkins a leadership solutions partner who you just heard from, and you'll be hearing from again next. Our last colleague to present today is Tim Davison, a regional manager. So on the webinar, on the next slide, we're going to talk about tools to encourage and strengthen others when we need it the most, along with ways to celebrate and replicate each other's success. We're going to look at simple things that we can do to make every interaction better. So to begin with, I'm going to be providing us an overview of the 4 types of disruptions we're seeing in financial services. And believe it or not, this is on top of our most recent challenges, COVID-19 and the racial injustice awareness. Shelley's going to walk you through an approach to have better conversations in light of these disruptions and challenges in order to make cultural shifts and improvements in organizations, one conversation at a time. And lastly, Tim's going to be sharing some success stories that puts all that we've learned on this call into context so we can see how this is played out. So on this slide, you can see there's a model, and Shelley's story illustrates the trust and relationship from not physically working in an office can be a challenge if it's not properly managed. So industry-wide, we know working from home was an occasional need. Little did we know that COVID-19 disruption was coming along and going to be making working from home a necessity for millions in financial services, whether or not we were prepared to do this. At CCL, we like to talk about disruption and how it cannot be avoided, but it can become more manageable when understood. We frame the forces of disruption into a single model, which we call RUPT. RUPT is an acronym that captures the nature and impact of turbulence and upheavals we experience. Rapid, unpredictable, paradoxical, and tangled. Using that model, we've identified 4 meta forces that are often the source for disruption: client-related, technology, industry, and societal, and then specific disruptions to financial services. But in the middle of all this, you can see is agility. We see agility as an important antidote to disruption. If you stick with how you've done things and expect the same results, you might not succeed. And COVID-19 is impacting these 4 meta forces differently, but they're intersecting when it comes to the new world of work and how we interact with others. We can't continue to do what we've done before in the past and thrive. We need to adapt and learn new skills and new ways to communicate. So before Shelley tells us how we accomplish it, and then Tim shares some success stories, I first want to poll our listeners. So as we just went through the 4 types of disruptions, which is the biggest disruption your company is facing now? Technology, client-related, industry-related, and societal. We have the poll up on the screen. So if you go ahead and choose which one of those is the one that your company is facing the biggest obstacle right now, and we'll let you know which one has been selected. As a thank you for joining this webinar, we will be sending you the Financial Services RUP report. So please be on the lookout for that in an email coming out in the next day or so. We'll go into a little bit more description of the model we just showed you on the previous slide and in depth on the meta forces for financial services. So that will be a little bit for you to take a read of when you get it tomorrow or the next day. So what are the 4 types of disruptions? Which one is the biggest your company is facing now? All right, so it looks like right now the leader was societal disruptions. That's at 36%. So roughly 1/3 of you said that. And the other 3, technology, client-related, and industry-related, are all sort of clumped together at 19 to 15%. So definitely right now, societal disruption is what we're seeing as the leader in the disruption. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Shelley, and she's going to walk us through the meat of the presentation. Shelley?
Thank you so much, Adam. As Adam mentioned, the environment is ripe for misunderstanding, for distrust, and no surprise that societal disruptions was ranked amongst the highest in terms of disruptions. And think about technology as well. Prior to COVID-19, I'd never heard of Zoom. Now it's a part of my daily communication, so lots of changes. So I want you to think about what the world would look like if we were having better conversations every day. What we're going to cover now are really 4 core behaviors that can be applied to any conversation to make it better. So again, while we're focused on financial services as an industry, I recognize just by looking at the attendee list that we have people from a lot of different industries. So it's cross industries, and these principles and frameworks that I'm going to share will also aid you not just at work, but home and also play. And so the 4 behaviors are listen to understand, ask powerful questions, challenge and support, and establish next steps and accountability. So in the chat room, I want you to write out for me, if you will, why are better conversations important to you? Why is that so necessary right now? And I'll just take a look and read some of your responses. So why are better conversations important to you? Okay, to increase understanding before action, connecting with coworkers, understanding others. Understanding is this common theme for is what I'm seeing here. Avoiding confusion. Hey, we lack that face-to-face connection, so it is so important. Build trust, deepen relationships, clarity. For progress to be made, it says we want to know we're being heard. Absolutely. Improved understanding. My results soar, our team makes impacts, and the organization is elevated. Absolutely. Understanding each other to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Lack of face connection to understanding. Consistency and work between multiple groups. So clearly we see that having better conversations are very much needed. I'd like for you to take a look at this continuum that you see here. And think about it. We all have conversations every day. Your conversations could be towards the left in terms of being very directive, involving telling or problem solving, giving advice or making suggestions. And I'm sure you'll also have conversations that we would consider developmental, the ones on the right, during which you might provide feedback, challenge someone's thinking, you do a lot of listening, or even asking powerful questions. Well, our focus today is going to be on tools to help with developmental conversations. So when you look at this continuum here, this spectrum of conversational behaviors, in the chat box, indicate which type of conversations do you think are most illustrative of your someone who has positively influenced your career. What do you think? So from a positive standpoint, what kind of conversations were you having? Okay, they challenged your thinking, listened, made suggestions, provided feedback, gave advice, provide feedback, give advice, challenge your thinking, guidance. So it's kind of interesting, asking much of what you're sharing. I'm gonna go so far as to say that the majority of what you're sharing fall under those developmental conversations. All right, let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's think of your least favorite leader. We think about their behaviors. What kind of conversations do you think, or would you categorize them as having? Okay, telling. Everyone has said telling, giving advice. Bossy. Bossy's not on the spectrum, but I get what you're saying. No conversation. That's even worse. So lots of advice. I think loud and clear people are basically saying that it was mostly telling, but for sure it was always on the directive type of conversation. Well, given the hypersensitivity that we're all experiencing working from home, we're likely to be doing more telling and being more directive than otherwise. And, you know, for me, that's just about self-awareness, right? That's right where we might be. But take note of that and look at having more developmental conversations. So what you could do, for example, is provide lots more positive feedback than negative. There's been a lot of studies that show that the ideal praise to criticism ratio is normally 5-to-1, so 5 positive to 1 negative. Now I think, you know, with everything that the stress that we're all under and the uncertainty that we're facing, you know, doing more like 6-to-1 or 7-to-1 is likely going to be more helpful. Being able to listen more intently, especially since some of our nonverbal cues may be missing. I mean, if you're not seeing each other on the video, then you may not get some of those facial expressions. Another thing is asking more with the intent of finding better ways to support those that we work with. So we're going to start with listening to understand, which is rooted in genuine curiosity. And this is not the normal way in which we listen. It's really a state of mind that involves paying full attention to the other person, avoiding premature judgment, reflecting, understanding, clarifying information, summarizing, and sharing. Too often what gets in the way of listening to understand is that we either have a lack of interest or inability to manage attention. And no wonder we're on these calls and our dogs are barking, the kids are knocking on the door, our cat is walking across the keyboard. I'm sure you all have seen all of this. I know I have. Or the all too famous, you know, thinking about how we're going to respond to someone before they even finish talking. Or we're too concerned about our own needs to really try to understand. Well, when we listen to understand, it's important to listen between the lines. And when we do that, it requires that we listen for facts, for feelings, as well as for values. So let me just quickly define these in the way in which I'm using them here. So facts being the very concrete data and events that person provides in their conversation. It's exactly what the person is saying, okay? Feelings, these are the emotions that a person might express verbally or nonverbally through their gestures or tone of voice. And values, these are the things that reflect the beliefs and issues that are important and motivate the person speaking. So what we've learned is that when we demonstrate that we've heard others deeper than just the facts that they've shared, they feel most heard. And I don't think that would be surprising to any of us. I think it's also important for us to keep in mind our own listening preference, right? So some of us may automatically prefer listening for facts or listening for feelings or listening for values. We need to be sure to make an effort to focus on the particulars of the listening level that's most difficult for us. So if listening for feelings is where we need to, you know, flex the muscles a little bit more, build muscle there, then we should concentrate on that a little more. When you do that, your brain will still be able to take in the information communicated at the level of your listening preference, but now you're also having a deeper conversation and ability to understand what the other person is saying. And pay attention. You know, as best as you can, remove all distractions where possible and maintain awareness of both visual contact and body language during your conversation. I remember seeing this little advertisement. I can't remember what the product was for, or it could have been something I saw on Facebook. And I remember this little girl was saying to her father, she was talking to him, and he said he was listening, but he wasn't looking at her. And she said, "Daddy, Daddy, will you listen to me with your eyes?" And, you know, sometimes we don't see the great importance of that, of feeling heard. Okay, so we've got a poll question up here. While working from home, how easy is it to listen for facts, feelings, and values as you speak to your colleagues? So I'm curious to know how well we're doing in this arena. So if you would submit your poll, whether or not you do it extremely well, you do it very well, or you just, okay, I do it, or not very well at all, or if you're even willing to admit that, in fact, you actually don't listen. So I'd love to be able to see just where we all land. And it'd be interesting to see really how this is different when we're actually in the office with others. Again, at least we have that in-person feeling or ability to see things that are a little bit more readily because of just gestures and such. All right, well, look, thanks for the honesty, because what I see here in terms of the polls is that we're all kind of like, you know, we're doing it well. You know, a few of you, 18%, are doing it very well. This is wonderful. Again, 29 admit, you know, I'm not doing it very well. And though the mass majority here says that, in fact, you're doing it okay. What I would suggest that you do is be proactive in trying to find ways to overcome these challenges to being able to listen for facts, feelings, and values. So those doing very well, how do we get to extremely well? Those not doing it so well or doing it well, how can we get to a place of being able to do it at least very well? All right, so now that you know what it means to truly listen to understand, let's talk about asking questions. And specifically, we're going to talk about the difference between a regular old question and a powerful question. So here I've got another poll for you. So this poll says, how often do you ask what, how, or tell me more? Is this something you do all the time? Do you do it most of the time? Do you do it occasionally? Not usually, or not at all? So let's see what most of you are saying. How often do you do it? I know in my coaching practice, this is something that I learned that I had to do all the time, is ask these kinds of questions in order to truly get below the surface. So, all right, looks like the poll has closed. And all right, this is pretty awesome. 55% of you said that you do it most of the time. The 4% that said they do it all the time, we probably need to talk, so you can give me some of your tricks of the trade. 24% of you said occasionally, and 12% of you said, well, you know what, not usually. So this is a section that I'm hoping we're going to really be able to add some value for you. So let's think about what makes for a powerful question. First of all, a powerful question is open-ended. And when you think about the kinds of communication, going back to that spectrum, when it's usually directive, we're telling, we're giving advice. In those cases, we're usually asking those close-ended questions. Did you or did you not? You know, looking for a yes or no. But these powerful questions, being open-ended, are typically short in the number of words. So you're not asking a question with 3 parts. And I'm sure some of you have been in conversations with people that have done that. A powerful question is one where you don't have a right answer in your mind. Powerful questions really are about the person and not the problem. The easiest, most powerful question that you can ask is, as it says on the bottom there, tell me more. And as I said, I use this all the time in my coaching practice to really go deep in thought with those that I'm working with. So I'm going to share with you 3 tips for asking powerful questions, and then I'll give you some sample questions. 1, during the first few minutes of a conversation, you ask questions that help the person to begin identifying what their current solution is, and then to identify their desired situation or the goal they want to achieve, okay? So try to get at where is it you're trying to go. When you find yourself dealing with a problem-solving situation, try asking questions, again, aimed at the person, not the problem, because when you focus your questions on the person, you're helping them find their own solutions. And then the 3rd tip that I'd share is use powerful questions to identify and clarify the problem or issue that the person wants to explore. And what you see here on the screen are just some sample powerful questions, things like, what would you like? Or what's the real issue? That's the question I really wanted to ask that manager I was telling you all about. What have you tried? You know, what are you afraid of? These are very deep-oriented questions, thought-provoking, and usually you don't get an immediate response because it is something that the person needs to think about. All right, so we've talked about listening to understand. We've just talked about asking powerful questions. Now let's move on to challenge and support. So better conversations often include helping each other explore new possibilities, and you do that by challenging the thinking and assumptions that the people may have or the person. You know, think about a time when someone said something or asked you a question that completely changed the way you were seeing a certain situation. All too often we get locked into certain ways of seeing things and, you know, we assume we all have the answers. Well, I would say that with our current state of affairs, it's really hard to hold on to any absolutes or any certainties. Why? Because, quite frankly, there are too many unknowns. When we're challenging and supporting others, we're not trying to solve the person's problem for them or get them to adopt our thinking. We're simply helping them to see outside the limits of their current thinking so that they can solve their own problems. We call this coaching the person and not the problem. So how do we do this? We do this by giving feedback and asking thought-provoking questions. And we're going to start with feedback. So if you think back to my story that I shared at the very beginning where I believed my manager was micromanaging me, well, let's say I go to him and I share with him that I believe he's micromanaging me, he doesn't trust me, and that, you know, I believe he's making assumptions about things that are not true. So I've made up a story about his intention, you know, and that story is, you don't trust me, and you're a micromanager, and I could go on and on and on. Well, what if I go to that manager and I have a conversation about his micromanaging problem? You know, I'm sure he would get defensive, and probably that conversation wouldn't go so well. Why? Because I'm leading with my interpretation of what his behavior means. I've now interpreted his intent. So it's valuable to think of it like this. My manager's behavior is the part I see above the water. If you look at this iceberg here, right? The little part above the water, his behavior, that's what I see. But the thoughts, the feelings, and meaning behind the behavior are under the surface, and really that is the largest part. You know, if I really want to have a better conversation, it's important that I find out the meaning behind the behavior and not just react to the behavior. And the only way I can make this conversation go well is to talk to him about the actual behavior that's bothering me, share the impact of that behavior on me, and then inquire about his intent. And so we can do this by using this very easy formula to frame the conversation. At CCL, we call this SBII. So the S stands for situation. That's a very specific time and place where the behavior occurred or is occurring. Behavior, what the other person actually did or does without my story of what that behavior means, okay? So it's just what is the behavior. The impact, how I feel or what I do in response to that behavior. And then the intention, and notice here, it's a pause. So you give, last week, 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you sent me a text asking me where I was because my IM light was off. I've told the situation, I've described the behavior. It made me feel as though you didn't trust me. Now I have to pause. I have to wait to now inquire about his intention. So what the other person is hoping to accomplish with their behavior describes that. So I can, wait to hear what he says. I could even, say, can you help me to understand, what may be going on? And he might say, I didn't realize I was doing that. Now we can begin moving forward with the solution if that was his response or whatever the response was. Now we can work towards problem solving. So here are a few tips for challenging and supporting through feedback. First of all, I would say an easy way to start a conversation is by asking about the intentions that motivated the person's behavior. And as best as possible, try to avoid generalizations like you always or you never. Try to avoid judgments or interpretations and opinions. And if you stick to the SBII model, it can really help you to do this. Always talk about the behavior because it really is the only thing you can actually see. Remember the iceberg. You don't know what's down below. And here, the goal of the feedback is simply to raise others' awareness of your perception. All right, so I mentioned that challenge and support is about both giving feedback and asking thought-provoking questions. And we just covered giving feedback, so now let's move on to those thought-provoking questions. What I would say is that when we look at the difference between challenge and support questions and powerful questions, challenge and support questions are very targeted to help others see beyond the limits of their current thinking and to show the other person that you're committed to his or her success. So asking why, for example, it challenges us to dig deeper, to find the true purpose behind our convictions. When we ask why, it challenges assumptions that keep us locked into certain limited ways of thinking. Asking if pushes us in the direction of more possibilities. For example, someone might say, I can't do this. And what if you said, well, what would it look like if you could? You can also ask playful and provocative questions because they tend to cause us to think of possibilities we never would have allowed ourselves to consider. Something like, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? So this type of question takes us really kind of out of our comfort zone and the confines of our current reality to just imagine what else might be possible. When someone comes to us with a problem, what's the first thing we typically want to do? Yep, we want to solve it for them. And if we want to have a developmental conversation, then we have to help them to solve their own problem. And we do this by asking questions that challenge the thinking of that other person and help them to see more possibilities. Holding up a mirror means then that we challenge and support others by helping them to see themselves in the moment. So what you see on the screen here are just some sample challenge and support questions. Things like, I love this first one. If you were 80 or 8 years old, how would you look at this? What's most important to you about this? I'm noticing, let's say you're sitting in front of someone and they looked off, you know, or their facial expressions change. You might say, what just happened? Or how could you look at the situation in a different way? Or who or what could make a difference? So I've got this question here. So in the chat room, type one word that would best describe what gets in the way of you challenging and or supporting others, especially while you're working from home. So what gets in the way? I'd like to be able to see kind of what you have here, and I think they're about to pull up the poll for us. And Regina, let's see. Okay, I see. It's not a poll. I'm seeing the chats that I'm not paying attention to them. Okay, so nonverbal cues, not having all the information, anxiety, assumptions, the visual cues, you know, we're missing time pressure, nerves, technology. Technology, that seems to be repeated. Just fear, lack of details, stress. And again, where insecurity absolutely is definitely the space in which we're living through. Lots of people are saying that technology, technology. So what I would say to you here again is, you know, realizing this, these are some challenges that could get in your way. Try to be proactive. Try to find ways to overcome. So what you're admitting is I'm trying to be self-aware that these things may get in my way. What can I do to prevent them or to circumvent them from taking, you know, a situation and making it worse, if you will. Okay, so the last behavior is establishing next steps in accountability. Have you ever had a conversation where you talked and talked but never really reached agreement on something? Well, I'm sure that's happened to all of us at least once. It's easy to talk theoretical about something, but it's quite different when it comes to committing to something. That's why this last behavior is so important, and in fact, it's pretty easy. So most conversations include a lot of information and talk focused on things that are outside of our influence and control. You know, it's all about the it and the them, right? The most powerful questions in conversations are about the two inner circles here. It's about what you can influence and what you can control. That is where you should spend your time and energy. As someone describes a challenge to you, you need to encourage them to think, is this something that's within their sphere of control, something they can influence, or is it outside of their control? I think it's more important to look inward at how we lead and how your actions affect those directly in that sphere of influence and responsibility. So by focusing on what is actually in their control, they're more likely to be successful doing something about it. And so here are some examples of some next steps in accountability questions. You can see here, you know, just simply asking them, hey, what can you control? What can you influence? What do you have to accept? How will you know you've been successful? How will you stay committed? What sacrifices will be required? So understanding and clearly articulating your next steps are important to make progress on your challenge. Oftentimes we've got good intentions for following through and we don't. And this is where having an accountability partner can make a huge difference. In fact, there's been research done in this subject, and this is really what the study shows. So as you can see here, just setting a goal, you have a chance 6 to 8% of achieving it. Setting and writing it, 25 to 30. If you set it, you write it, and you share it, 55 to 60%. But wow, goes up 80% and more if you do all of those things with an accountability partner. That accountability partner can help you cross the finish line. So let me say, not just anyone is going to be a good accountability partner. In fact, enlisting a friend or family member as an accountability partner could be a recipe for a disaster. An ideal accountability partner is going to do this. They're going to call for accountability. In other words, they're going to hold you accountable. They're not going to have any problems providing feedback and making sure the plan is followed. And thirdly, they're going to be interested and invested in the goal's success. So we've made our way through the 4 core behaviors for having better conversations every day. We've talked about the importance of listening to understand, asking those powerful questions, challenging and supporting others, and then the importance of setting next steps and having that accountability partner. What I'd like for you all to do is to make one commitment that you can take away from this session that's going to help you to have better conversations every day. So in the chat room, I want you to write down what's one commitment you're willing to make to have better conversations. And so let me just take a look at what some of you are saying in the chat room, your commitments. Okay, you're going to be an active listener, listen and use more open-ended questions. Critical to ask better questions. Focus on the other person, not the problem. I love it. Work on holding accountability, asking better questions, using SBMI in more conversations. Beautiful. Open-ended questions, powerful questions. Don't jump to problem solving. It's so easy for us to do that, right? Work on asking better questions. Have a commitment to have an accountability partner. Challenge more. Listen and be direct with words. I love it. I love it. I love it. This makes me feel wonderful. Now you realize that because you have set the goal, you wrote it down, you shared it in the chat room, and now we've all seen it, your chances of being able to realize this goes up between 55 to 60%. So I applaud you for doing that. Well, next, I'm going to turn this over now to my colleague, Tim. He's going to share some real-life examples within a financial services organization of how this has helped the organization that he worked very closely with. So with that, Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Shelley. So you're probably thinking to yourself right now, how can I, other than individually, which is what we just committed to in our chat box, and of course the percentage is going to be higher, how can I bring this back to my organization to effectively impact others around me? So I want to share a quick story with a client that we have worked with within the financial services industry. And it's actually a really special story about how they've been able to create this ecosystem of different types of behaviors that are going to start creating this trust and really care for people across the organization. So this organization is about a 125-year-old financial services organization located in the U.S., the Caribbean, and throughout Latin America. They have about 8,000 employees across their organization. And how they came to us here at CCL is they were facing some competitive pressures in an effort to attract and retain some of the most talented employees. And so they discovered through some employee surveys as well as some other internal surveys that trust and communication levels between employees and the organization were optimal. So the company wanted to develop and create more of a collaborative, trusting culture where people would have meaningful, candid, and constructive conversations about performance. It sought a solution that improved collaboration and trust internally, but was in line with the goals of becoming an employer and business of choice, while strengthening its financial solutions among financial solutions brand among consumers. So importantly, the financial services company wanted much more than just an off-the-shelf solution. So it sought out a collaborator to create a solution that they can partner to integrate deeply among its own, nurturing and creating a coaching focus to transform the organization's long-term culture. So after a rigorous search, they decided to work with CCL to implement a solution, what Shelley was just talking about, called Better Conversations Every Day. The solution focused on having these better conversations across all levels in the organization to strengthen trust and communication. The first phase of the work that we did with them was to identify what were the key development areas that we aligned with the business imperatives for these new organizational behaviors. And then we established some key indicators to track the impact of the solution. The company and CCL selected, like what I mentioned before, this scalable solution called Better Conversations Every Day as the vehicle to drive the organization's goals. One critical factor in the company's engagement was CCL's ability to adapt BCE to its unique needs, given their geography and working across different types of cultures. In addition, we created a solution that we could develop internal capabilities within the organization, having them be able to deliver the solution and not just CCL. So they had to have less reliance on CCL to actually deliver the solution across the organization. To be able to do this, we scaled a licensing agreement and a train-the-trainer that enabled them to deliver the solution and beyond and really contextualize the solution to their own organization. As of today, we've developed with them over 2,000 employees who have gone through this 1 day or 2 4-hour online training called Better Conversations Every Day. And now we're going to be delivering it to all of the other 6,000 employees in the organization through a micro-learning experience called Better Conversations Amplify. The partnership has also strengthened other strategic initiatives with the company, such as their customer service and engagement scores, and we're measuring it with something we call CCL Fusion. The next slide. So what are some of the results that some of our leaders, so they said that about 87% of the leaders are more comfortable with asking others for feedback. We have about leaders are more comfortable with giving their colleagues feedback, as well as leaders are more comfortable with their manager giving feedback. So we've been able to impact not just their employee engagement scores, but also started to accelerate the culture change that is happening within an organization by creating an ecosystem around them to be able to support their ongoing culture change. Next slide. Here is just some comments that people have made because of the solution. And one thing that we really love about BCE here at CCL is that it is a simple, skill-based solution that you can practice. So everything that Shelley has talked about today, you are able to do all in 1 day, but really focusing around something that's important to you and just practicing these 4 core behaviors so that when you leave that 1 day solution, you can go and have a better and more powerful conversation with not just with your employees or your boss, but how people have been able to take this back into their homes and having better conversation with their families. And of course, in today's world, having a better conversation with your family could probably save a couple fights within your family too, given that everyone's living in the same household. So something that you can really take home as well as practice day to day. Better Conversations has really helped with at least this client. Next story, or next slide. So we're going to open it up. We have about 12 minutes left. We wanted to open up to any questions, so I'll pass it back over to you, Shelley.
This is Adam. Sorry, Tim. Thank you for going over the client success stories. And once again, this is Adam. I'm going to go ahead and read any of the questions that we got during the session. If we don't happen to get to any of the questions that you may have submitted, we'll make sure to follow up with you individually after this phone call with your questions to being answered if we need to supply materials or find another person who can answer your question. But so the first question that I had is actually, Shelley, it's to you. It was when you were doing the asking powerful questions. Do you have any suggestions when you're asking powerful questions, but the receiver of the questions is taking those questions very personally as if you're attacking them? How do you handle that situation?
Yeah, I think that is a good question. That is a powerful question. I think what I tried to stress throughout, and this is where the SBMI model comes in, is when you can really focus on behavior, you are directing it at a specific person's behavior, but, share the behavior of what the person is doing and not attack the person. So asking those questions, again, framing it in such a way that it's around behavior. And if you ever feel like you're getting off track, going back to that, this happened last Tuesday in our leadership meeting. This is the behavior that I saw, and this was the impact on me. Now, that's very personal to you. This is how it impacted you, or this is how it impacted the team. But I think the key point here is giving that breathing room for someone to now come back and share. But you are focusing on the behavior, not just, coming at the person as though you're attacking them. What other questions do we have?
Okay, Shelley, another one that has come in that's sort of along the same guidelines of asking powerful questions. Now that we're in more of a virtual environment, can you ask powerful questions sort of in a virtual environment like IM or email, or should you save it for phone calls or face-to-face or videos?
Yeah, so that's another great question. Let me tell you my practice. If I think that there's room for misinterpretation, I always save those for at a minimum where I can hear the person's voice, so there's tone and that type of thing. But I would say better than that is to be able to lock your eyes on them in some way if you can, through WebEx or Zoom or Skype. But anytime I'm dealing with something where it's a sensitive topic, I think being able to see each other so that you can get the full breadth of what's being communicated is so very important to do. So I would definitely try to avoid email on sensitive topics. Another practice that I have when maybe email is my only choice is if I know that my response maybe is going to be heated, I might write a draft and then I save it for the end of the day. I come back to it, or I come back to it the next day. And in many cases, when I've had time to just kind of sit on it, I have a better way of being able to frame what I'm going to say, the questions I'm going to ask, or what I'm going to express, because I've allowed time for kind of my emotions to move out of, outside of the frame of, what's going on. So those would be my recommendations.
Great, thank you, Shelley. And then, Tim, we had a question for you related to the client story. How long has it taken to get this client to where they are now?
Yeah, so we've been working with this organization for about 2 years. So the majority of the work that we did with them, which was ramping their organization up, took about 7 to 8 months, and then they were delivering it by themselves. So that's about how long. So we're continually working with them to able to refine what they're doing. We're not just giving it to them and walking away. It's that we're continually supporting them as partners. But they're doing a lot of the lift with the organization, and that's been about 2 years.
Okay, great. And Shelley, a question maybe to wrap up, since you started with the story about an interaction with your manager. How did that end up?
Not good. And I say it wasn't good because this was pre-CCL. This was pre-Better Conversations Every Day. This was pre-SBII. Let's just say today I've been certainly more proactive when I've had conversations with colleagues or even clients and being able to frame it so that I can have a better conversation. So I really wasn't working with the tools that I have today. And the relationship did not get better. We didn't have good conversation. And eventually I found a way to move to another area. And, but that's, that's the sad part. And it does show what can happen when you don't have, better conversations every day. You can lose talent. People can just feel, not appreciated, lose productivity, all of those things when you don't deal with situations. So more of a reason why you really do need to have these better conversations and do it sooner than later. I absolutely do it now. I'm not saying that it's easy. It's not. I had to have a better conversation yesterday with a colleague of mine And I used my SBMI model. This is what happened last Friday. And I went through the behaviors, helped them to see how the impact their behavior was on me. And we left the meeting completely, turned around. And so I was grateful because it was a heavy weight I had on my shoulders, and we were able to turn that conversation and our relationship. And it was funny, by the end of the day, this person was like sending me some helpful information. So just a total difference in climate when you do take the time to build relationships, build trust, and have those better conversations.
Great. Well, thanks for how that story sort of ended up, unfortunately. But we all learned through our experiences. Michelle, I just want to ask you if you maybe answer in 1 minute before we end the call, is how do you encourage active listening and feedback in the area of Zoom calls, Skype calls, team calls, you name it, where there's sort of less words between people and maybe a given speaker who's talking?
So I guess we can only really speak for ourselves, right? I think that you've got to find intent. I can't ask this other person, you need to be an active listener. So here, I'm really working on myself. What I do is I try to really focus on, am I going to miss something critical here if I don't listen? So it's being intentional. And I always come back to self-awareness and self-management. If you realize that with Zoom, with multiple presentations, that, you kind of, drift off, which is very easy to do, first of all, that's self-awareness. You're doing that. So you need to kind of set some prompts for yourself or things that you want to listen for. Or maybe you want to decide to take notes, anything like that to help you to kind of stay attentive to what's being said. Maybe listen for, again, practicing powerful questions. That would be a great thing. If you've got an upcoming meeting that, wow, you may be dreading to sit in or listen through, use this as a chance to try to practice, hey, what would be a good question to ask, a powerful question to ask? Hey, I wonder what they meant by that. So challenge yourself. And I would say over time, you'll get better at it. But it's really about intentionality. If you want to be an active listener, you have to be intentional about doing that.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. Michelle, this is Adam. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shelley, Tim, and Adam, for sharing how these better conversations can address these disruptions, build a strong organizational culture, and drive performance for these financial services firms. So everyone who registered today will receive a follow-up email with links to the webinar recording, as well as relevant industry articles and leadership resources for the times of crisis. So as you exit the webinar, we hope you'll take a moment to complete the evaluation so we can continue to make these webinar events well worth your time. So we look forward to your attendance at a future webinar, and I will just turn it over to you guys. Thanks so much.
All right, I guess this concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. And please visit our webcast event calendar at www.ccl.org. Thank you.